There was a time when social media felt like a window into people's lives, their relationships, their happiness, their everyday moments. You'd see couples posting about trips, birthdays, silly captions that made you smile. It all looked light-hearted, harmless. But then something changed. Slowly. Almost quietly. You started noticing a different tone. Posts that used to be about connection started turning into complaints. Jokes about men not texting back. Threads about red flags. Screenshots of arguments shared for likes. And somewhere in all of that, the way men and women talked about each other started to shift. It wasn't just playful teasing anymore. It became colder, sharper. Suddenly you'd scroll through your feed and feel this tension underneath everything. Sounds like everyone was tired, guarded, and ready to argue. It wasn't about one person or one group. It was cultural. The whole tone of how men and women related to each other online had changed. And what's strange is that nobody really announced it. Nobody said, "We're done giving each other the benefit of the doubt." It just happened slowly through memes, videos, and trends. You'd see a woman post something about dating struggles, and the comments would flood with stories about men who lied, cheated, disappeared. And then men would respond with posts about being unappreciated, used, or dismissed. It was like both sides were trying to prove how bad the other had become. And here's the thing, people started believing it. Because when you see enough posts about heartbreak, betrayal, and disappointment, your brain starts connecting the dots. Even when the dots aren't the full picture. It's not that social media suddenly made women hate men overnight. It's that it slowly turned frustration into identity. It made pain public and then profitable. And before long, that collective tone, that coldness, became normal. You could feel it in conversations, in comments, even in dating itself. People weren't talking to each other anymore. They were talking at each other, trying to win an invisible argument about who hurt who more. That's where the shift really began. Not in one viral post, not in one breakup story, but in the slow erosion of empathy. And once empathy starts disappearing, resentment moves in quietly to replace it. If you've ever wondered why everything online feels so extreme, the answer is simple. The internet doesn't reward calm. It rewards emotion. The more dramatic something sounds, the more attention it gets. That's how the algorithm works, not by showing you what's true, but by showing you what keeps you staring at the screen. So when someone posts something angry, when they call out men for being toxic or unfaithful or emotionally unavailable, that anger spreads. Not because it's always accurate, but because it's engaging. People share it, argue with it, stitch it, defend it. Every interaction tells the algorithm, this is important. Show it to more people. And suddenly your feed is filled with outrage. Not because that's what everyone believes, but because that's what performs best. It becomes an echo chamber, the same messages bouncing back and forth until they start to feel like facts. Men are trash. All guys cheat. Don't trust them. They only want one thing. At first it's just content, but the repetition starts to sink in. You hear it enough times and it begins to sound like truth. Meanwhile, the quiet voices, the ones saying, not all men are like that, or maybe this is more complicated than it looks, get buried. Their posts don't go viral. They sound too balanced, too reasonable, too uninteresting to the algorithm. And here's the danger of that. When you only ever see one side of the story, it stops feeling like an opinion. It starts feeling like the whole world. Social media isn't a reflection of reality. It's a reflection of what gets clicks. But most people forget that. They log off believing they've just seen proof that men are broken, selfish, or emotionally stunted. And because they believe it, they start expecting it. They start assuming bad intentions before anyone even does anything wrong. It's subtle, but powerful. You go from being open to being defensive, from curious to cynical. You start dating like you're waiting to be disappointed, and eventually even good men start to feel like suspects. That's how the echo chamber works, not by lying outright, but by exaggerating pain until it becomes identity. It's a loop of confirmation where everyone's worst experience becomes everyone else's expectation. And the more you feed that loop, the less you remember what real connection even looks like. Because online outrage wins. But in real life, it just leaves everyone more alone. Spend enough time scrolling through social media and you start noticing a pattern. Different stories, but the same ending. A woman opens up about a relationship that broke her, and the comments fill with words like narcissist, gaslighter, manipulator. It's like every man who made a mistake now fits into one of a few villain categories. The emotionally unavailable guy, the guy who led her on, the guy who didn't know what he wanted, the guy who ghosted. And once you've seen those labels enough times, it's hard to separate the person from the stereotype. You stop seeing individuals, you start seeing characters in a script that social media wrote for you. The truth is, these stories come from real pain. Many women have been hurt deeply, and they share those stories to make sense of what happened, to find support. And that's fair. Everyone deserves to feel heard. But what the internet does is take that pain and package it. It turns it into content. It's not just one story anymore, and it's a trend, a sound, a quote post, a type. And that's when things get dangerous, because what started as healing becomes entertainment. You can scroll through thousands of videos talking about signs he's a narcissist or how to spot toxic men. Some of them come from good intentions, to protect people, but others feed the idea that men by nature are harmful, that the average guy is just another potential villain waiting to reveal himself. It's comforting in a strange way to believe there's a simple explanation for pain. He hurt me because he's broken. It's cleaner than saying he was confused. He was immature. He didn't know how to love right. The villain narrative removes complexity. It turns messy, human situations into black and white stories, and people eat that up because simplicity feels safe. But what gets lost in all that simplicity is understanding. Not every bad experience means the person was evil. Sometimes it just means two people didn't know how to communicate, or one wasn't ready for the kind of love the other needed. The danger of these male villain archetypes is that they start to shape perception. When a woman meets someone new, she's already looking for red flags. When a man tries to be open, she's waiting for him to prove he's different from the others. And eventually those expectations become walls. Social media taught women to expect villains, and it taught men to walk on eggshells, both trapped in roles that no one chose, but everyone keeps performing. Because if the internet keeps telling you that you're supposed to be angry or defensive, it's hard to remember what it means to be curious or forgiving or open. That's how division grows, not through hate, but through stories that quietly teach you who to distrust. When someone shares pain online, it doesn't just disappear into the void, it gets rewarded. A post about being mistreated, ignored, or disrespected almost always finds an audience. The likes, comments, and shares come pouring in. Thousands of people say, "Same," or "I went through this too." And for a moment, that feels powerful. It feels like being seen. But what most people don't realize is that social media quietly turns that pain into performance. The more people react, the more the algorithm pushes it out. And before long, the internet starts to teach a dangerous lesson. If you want validation, tell the world how someone hurt you. It's not that these stories aren't true. Many are. The problem is what happens next. The attention reinforces the narrative. The heartbreak becomes identity. Men always do this. Never trust them again. This is why I stay single. Every like, every comment saying, "You're right," adds another layer of certainty. Another reason not to question whether every man deserves the blame. And the more that cycle repeats, the deeper it gets. Pain becomes content. Content becomes validation. Validation becomes belief. It's not malicious. It's psychological. You post something raw and suddenly 1,000 strangers are telling you that you were right all along, that it's not you, it's them. And that feels good. It's relief disguised as truth. But here's the hidden cost. Every time the internet tells you you're right, it takes away the chance to reflect. To ask, what part of this do I still need to understand? Or, what kind of person do I want to become after this? Instead, you stay in the same emotional loop. Angry, justified, certain. The story never evolves because it's too profitable not to. And the people giving validation, most of them are stuck in the same loop. Everyone's reinforcing each other's hurt. Everyone's right, and no one's healing. It's subtle, but it's powerful. Because validation feels like progress, but it's not. It's just comfort. And too much comfort keeps you from growing. That's how social media traps people. It doesn't just amplify your story, it monetizes your emotion. It sells your pain back to you, dressed up as empowerment. But empowerment built on resentment isn't strength. It's armor, and armor keeps everyone at a distance, especially the people who might actually care. The truth is, healing doesn't happen in front of an audience. It happens quietly, in the parts of your life that don't need likes to feel real. The internet doesn't leave room for grey areas. Everything gets flattened into extremes. You're either a good man or a toxic one, a victim or an abuser. There's no space for mistakes, for growth, or for context. And that's the real tragedy, because real life isn't that simple. In real life, people are complicated. A man can care deeply but still fail to show it right. He can want love but be afraid of it at the same time. He can make a bad decision and still not be a bad person. But none of that fits neatly into a post. Online, there's no space for a story that says, "He wasn't ready," or "We both made mistakes." That doesn't go viral. What goes viral is blame. Blame is easy to digest. It makes people pick sides. So nuance dies, subtlety dies. The human side of things gets edited out. You start seeing people post long captions about how men are emotionally unavailable, how they lack empathy, how they don't want to commit. And maybe those things feel true sometimes, but only because the algorithm keeps feeding you examples of men who fit that mold. It never shows the quiet guy who's learning to communicate better, or the one who's showing up even when it's uncomfortable, or the one trying to unlearn everything he was taught about not showing emotion. Those stories don't trend. They don't fit the narrative that keeps people scrolling. And the result is this quiet kind of hopelessness. Women start believing that men can't change. Men start believing that no matter what they do, it'll never be enough. Everyone ends up walking around with half the story, the half that hurts more. It's not that people want to hate each other, it's that social media makes it harder to see each other fully. Because empathy takes time, understanding takes listening, and none of that fits into a 10-second clip or a tweet. So what you're left with are half-truths, exaggerated, simplified, and emotionally charged. You see a woman post about being used and you think, yeah, that's how men are. You see a man post about being rejected and you think, yeah, women only want attention. And just like that, the space in between, the part where understanding could have happened, disappears. That's what social media does best. It takes complex human stories and turns them into easy narratives that feel true but aren't. And over time, those small distortions start to shape how we see the opposite sex, not as people, but as patterns. Once you start seeing patterns instead of people, empathy fades, and when empathy fades, connection becomes almost impossible. At some point, men stop talking, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because they realized that whatever they said could be used against them. Every time a man tried to explain his side, it was met with sarcasm or dismissal. Here we go, another guy playing the victim. Maybe if men just treated women better, they wouldn't have to complain. So they stopped. They stayed quiet, not out of pride, out of exhaustion. Because how do you speak up in a space that's already decided what you are? How do you open up about your pain when you know it'll just get compared to someone else's? You start to notice it everywhere, men being careful with their words, holding back opinions, laughing off real emotions because they know what happens when you're too honest online. You get labelled, misunderstood, mocked, and after a while silence feels safer than explanation. That silence isn't strength, it's self-protection. It's the sound of men who don't want to be misread anymore. But here's the twist. That silence gets misinterpreted too. Women start seeing it as coldness, indifference, emotional unavailability. See? Men never open up. They don't care. But they do care. They're just tired of being told their feelings don't count. So instead of speaking, they retreat. They go numb. They keep things surface level. They avoid deeper conversations because they've learned that being misunderstood hurts more than being quiet. And in that quiet, something else happens. Resentment builds. Not loud resentment, the kind you'd see in a fight, but quiet, slow resentment. The kind that makes men feel unseen. It's the quiet distance you feel in relationships where nobody's being honest anymore, where everyone's just trying not to get blamed. Social media made that worse, because when a man sees endless posts calling men toxic, lazy, or emotionally immature, even if it's not directed at him, it chips away at him. He starts wondering if there's any space left where he's not being treated like a problem. That's the part most people don't talk about. How the constant noise of blame made a lot of men emotionally mute. Not because they didn't care, but because they felt like they couldn't win. You can only listen to people tell you who you are for so long before you stop trying to prove them wrong. And that's how this divide deepened. One side shouting, the other going quiet. Both feeling unheard, both feeling right. But silence doesn't heal anything. It just hides the pain long enough for it to harden. Here's the part nobody really wants to admit. All of this tension between men and women. It's good for business. Every angry post, every argument in the comments, every video that goes viral because someone's furious about dating or gender or relationships, it all makes money. Outrage keeps people online longer. Division keeps people clicking. The more emotional you are, the more data you generate, the more ads you see, the more the system profits. The platforms don't care who's right, they care who's engaged. So they feed both sides just enough fuel to keep the fire going. Women get videos about how men are dangerous, emotionally unavailable, untrustworthy. Men get videos about how women are manipulative, shallow, or entitled. And both sides walk away more convinced than ever that they're the ones being mistreated. It's a perfect loop. Anger becomes entertainment, and entertainment becomes addiction. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a calm, balanced conversation about relationships go viral? When was the last time a post about understanding each other hit 1 million views? It doesn't happen. Peace doesn't trend. Outrage does. So the algorithm keeps showing you the worst examples of the opposite sex, not the healthy, kind, ordinary people who actually make up most of the world, but the loudest, most extreme ones. You scroll through enough of that, and suddenly it feels like men and women are at war. But that's not real life. That's just the version of reality that sells best. It's psychological manipulation dressed up as culture. You start believing you're part of some moral struggle, that you need to stand up for your gender, defend your experiences, expose the other side. And while everyone's busy fighting, the platforms just keep cashing in. But the real damage isn't just in the money. It's in what this constant conflict does to people's hearts. It makes you skeptical before you even meet someone. It convinces you that vulnerability is weakness. It tells you to protect yourself from the very thing you actually want, connection. Because outrage feels powerful, but connection feels risky. And risk doesn't go viral. So the divide keeps growing. Not because men and women can't understand each other, but because there's no profit in them doing so. And that's the quiet truth about social media. It doesn't just reflect culture. It shapes it. It teaches people what to fear, what to desire, and who to blame. Once you see that, it's hard not to notice how much of our pain is being sold back to us. One scroll at a time. After a while, all the noise starts to wear people down. You can feel it. The fatigue, the cynicism, the quiet loneliness underneath all the strong opinions. Women scroll through endless posts about how men can't be trusted, and they start to believe it. Men scroll through endless content about how women are manipulative or self-centered, and they start believing that too. And what you end up with are two groups of people who both feel unsafe with each other. Women start dating with their guard up. They're suspicious, scanning for red flags before they even learn someone's name. They expect disappointment before connection. Men do the same. They stop being open, stop showing effort, because they've learned that no matter what they do, it'll probably be misread or dismissed. It's not hatred, it's exhaustion. Everyone's tired of trying to prove they're not like the others. Tired of walking into new relationships already carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. Social media didn't just divide people, Sesab, it rewired how they think about each other. It made fear feel like wisdom. It made distance feel like safety. So people stay guarded. They talk about independence and not needing anyone, as if that's strength. But deep down, most of them are just protecting themselves from disappointment. You can see it in the tone of dating conversations now. Nobody flirts anymore, they debate. Nobody listens to understand, they listen to defend. Every comment feels like a test. Are you one of the good ones, or are you just pretending? That's the emotional fallout, not open hostility, just quiet mistrust. The kind that seeps into everything, even in friendships, even in marriages. You start to see people keeping emotional distance out of habit, not because of what's happening in the moment, but because of what they've absorbed from the culture around them. It's subtle but powerful. This collective disconnection disguised as empowerment. Everyone's protecting themselves and nobody's actually connecting. And the saddest part? Most people can't even tell what's real anymore. They can't tell the difference between what's true in their life and what they've been conditioned to believe by endless scrolling. They start mistaking algorithms for evidence. But real life, real connection, isn't that cynical. Most men aren't villains. Most women aren't bitter. Most people are just trying and hurting and hoping it'll make sense someday. They just don't post about that part. That's the quiet cost of this cultural divide, a world full of people who want love but don't trust it anymore. If you step away from the screen for a while, you start to notice something. The world isn't nearly as divided as it looks online. When you actually talk to people, not through comments or captions, but face to face, most of them still want the same things. To be loved, to be understood, to feel safe with someone. The hate, the bitterness, the constant blaming, it's mostly noise, manufactured by repetition, kept alive by algorithms. In the real world, most women don't walk around despising men. They're cautious, yes. They're guarded from being hurt before. But deep down, most still hope there's someone out there they can trust. Someone who'll see them beyond the layers of disappointment they've learned to carry. And most men, they're not bitter or angry like the internet makes them out to be. They're just quiet. Careful with their words. They've seen what happens when they open up, and they're tired of being misjudged for simply existing in a culture that keeps calling them broken. If you strip away the noise, you start to see the truth. Most people are still good. They're just afraid to show it. Because when you live online too long, you start confusing exposure with experience. You start thinking that the worst examples are the average ones. But they're not. They're just amplified. Real life is slower, softer, messier. It doesn't fit into tweets or trending sounds. It's found in small moments. Now, when someone remembers your coffee order or checks in just to ask if you're okay. Those moments never go viral, but they're real. The more time you spend offline, the more you start to feel it again. That quiet truth that men and women aren't enemies. They're just people trying to understand each other in a world that profits from keeping them apart. You start realizing that the anger that lives online doesn't belong to you. You absorbed it. You carried it, but it was never yours to begin with. And the more you remember what's real, the more you slow down, talk to people, listen without assuming, the more that old warmth comes back. The kind that existed before everyone turned their pain into content. Before people learned to measure truth by engagement. Because deep down, everyone's still looking for connection. Everyone still wants to be trusted, wanted, understood. Social media can't destroy that. It can only bury it for a while. But when you start to look people in the eyes again instead of through a screen, you remember most of us are still on the same side. Healing doesn't start with a post or a movement. It starts in small, private choices, the kind that nobody applauds. It starts when you stop assuming the worst about the opposite sex. When you stop scrolling for proof that your pain was justified and start asking what it would look like to try again, to trust again, even a little. The way back isn't about proving a point. It's about reclaiming something simple that got lost in all the noise, empathy. Because somewhere along the line, people forgot how to see each other as human. Every man became a potential threat. Every woman became a potential manipulator. Everyone's defensive, scanning for signs of betrayal before connection even starts. But connection only works when someone decides to go first. That's the real bravery. Not shouting louder online, but being the first to drop your guard. To say, I want to understand you, instead of, I already know what you're like. It doesn't mean ignoring your past or pretending bad people don't exist. It just means remembering that not everyone is your past. Not everyone's out to hurt you. Most people are just scared of being the one who cares more. Scared of looking foolish for believing again. Scared of being rejected for being sincere in a culture that rewards cynicism. But someone has to go first. Someone has to be willing to try even when it feels unsafe. And maybe that's where the healing starts. Not on social media, not in some debate about who's worse, but in quiet moments between two people who choose to see each other differently. It happens when a man listens without feeling attacked. When a woman speaks without assuming he won't understand. When both decide they'd rather connect than win. Because connection doesn't need a platform. It just needs presence. And once you start practicing that, in real conversations, in your relationships, in how you think about people, you start to feel lighter. The resentment fades, the noise gets quieter. You stop needing the internet to tell you how to feel about love because you start experiencing it again for real. That's the way back. Through empathy, through honesty, through remembering that most people aren't as cruel as the internet makes them look. They're just trying, like you are. And maybe that's enough to start over, because the truth is, None of this hate was ever natural. It was taught, and anything that can be taught can be unlearned.